This is Peter,
And this is Tom,
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcast.
now part of the Evergreen Podcast Network.
All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tommy, what do we got today?
Well, today we're going to look at a warrior class, military nobility of ancient Japan, or otherwise known as the samurai. So we'll look a little bit about what made up this ruling military class, the social caste that they had, basically, who employed them, the weapons that they used, the tactics that they used, their rise, and then their eventual fall. We'll talk about some fun facts, some infamous samurais along the way and stuff like that, and hopefully give you a little bit of background information on the samurai.
You know, when I was doing research for this, one, we just briefly talked about it before I click record. I learned a lot more about Japan, and it's funny because we've taken classes in college, you and I, about the history of Japan, and I guess you forget stuff.
It's definitely interesting to have a whole rich culture, and I think one reason that makes it interesting, Pete, like you were saying, just because it's different, obviously, than what we're used to in the West, but there's some similarities there too.
A lot, yeah, and I think we'll touch upon those as well. But Japan itself, as just so we know, we are talking about Japan, not China. So let's not get confused. Samurai do come from Japan, from China. Same thing with ninjas, which could be a podcast in itself. I kind of came across a lot of that history doing this.
Well, there was some interaction between samurai and ninja, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yep. So Japan obviously lies east of China, in the direction of the sunrise. So Japan itself comes from a Chinese word, comes from two Chinese words, Jikpen, right, which actually means from the direction of the sun, which makes sense, which is why it is often known
as the land of the rising sun, like their flag. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's made up of about 3,000 volcanic islands. Many of these 3,000 volcanic islands, though, are very tiny. Primarily, the people themselves live on just the four of the largest islands. And we're not really going to get into all of Japanese history, but really kind of start off with when does this class of samurai warriors really come to be? And everywhere I looked at it, it basically said around 646 AD.
Yeah, getting around that time. Well, basically, the samurai, right, with the bushi, right? They were the warriors of Japan we talked about. And they were the highest social caste of the Edo period, right? And that was from 1603 to 1867. They employed a bunch of different weapons, bows, arrows, spears. They did use guns. That's something that I didn't really know about until later on. They did use some aspects of guns and stuff like that, but mostly we're talking about the katana and their swords. And they were supposed to, they were supposed to live their lives according to the code of Bushido, which I'm sure you've heard of before. People hear of that, right? The way of the warrior. But it was really influenced by Confucianism. And it stressed concepts like loyalty to the master, self-discipline, respectful behavior. And it was a lot of samurais were also drawn to the teachings of Zen Buddhism. So it was really like a peaceful and kind of flow and everything. Then it's also brutal war also. So you have this balance, right? That yin and yang is also something that's very big in that culture.
Tracing it back a little bit as to how we go about the rise, I guess, of the samurai, it was known as the Heian Age in Japan. It's around 1000 to 1200. Japan develops this feudal system, right? Very similar to one in Europe, kind of like the Middle Ages. We alluded to that before. Each lord within Japan, because Japan was broken into these different lordships, you might say.
What you would think of when you learn feudalism in ancient Europe. When you had the different kingdoms, it's the same basic concept. It's just happening in Japan, in Asia.
Yeah, feudal Japan. So each one of these lords would surround itself with a bodyguard or these loyal warriors. And there's a lot of wars going on around 1000 to 1200 between these different rival lords. And it was commonplace. They fought all the time. And then the lesser lords would kind of pledge to fight for the greater lords in exchange for some form of protection. And eventually peasants began to pay taxes to these lords, and not really to the central government. So really Japan was ruled by these lords. But where I'm getting at here is all these lords had these warriors that fought for them and protected them. And these warriors were known as the samurai. Samurai actually meant one who serves, if you look at the definition of it. This idea of the samurai, which we'll get into the Bushido and all that stuff, basically samurai's honor was constantly on the line. The idea was to prove one's absolute courage in battle and loyalty to his lord. What eventually starts to happen is by 1100s, there's two main clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, and they kind of gathered the largest armies of samurai, and they wound up fighting up and down these two clans, murderous battles, so on and so forth. And after almost 30 years or so of fighting, the war ends in 1185 with a Minamoto victory. And in 1192, the emperor kind of realizes that he doesn't have much power, so he gives Minamoto leader named Yoritomo. I think
Yoritomo.
Yoritomo. He gives him the title of the first shogun, which
Yeah.
actually meant the supreme general of the emperor's army. And from that point forward, the shogun really has the real power. It's kind of like a military dictator, you might say. The official judges, taxes, armies, roads, well, all under the shogun's authority. So the emperor still lived around in Kyoto, but at the end of the day, it really was the shogun that kind of
And that kind
controlled
of
Japan.
tying to what we were more associated with this, like in World War II and stuff. That idea is still there. Like these, like when it's like the military's ruling things with the emperor as the supreme being, right?
Yeah.
That type of stuff. So the shogun, even though they're not called shoguns or samurais,
So yeah, but they're just
the
generals.
generals,
Yeah.
but like also like the Japanese, like they purposely bring back that idea of the samurai and the Bushido code, but they say now everyone can do that, right? So because the
Yep.
samurais are just so like legendary status in Japan by the 1930s
Yep.
and 40s. So and like descendants of samurais were still alive, obviously. So they just kind of like say, oh, you can be samurai, like follow that code. You're that now for their new regime. And that's one reason
Yep.
why they kind of brought it back. And so many of them had those swords and stuff like that. That's getting a little off topic, but this culture is so strong that like it carries on even to modern times.
Absolutely. And actually lasted for a long time because what happens is the
Oh,
shogun
700 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
winds up moving the military headquarters to Kamakura and basically becomes known as the Kamakura Shogun. And it lasts, you're right, about 700 years till like 1860s. You basically are ruled under this system of shoguns. And there's a lot of local lords that are still holding power, except the shogun is like the real leader of the nation. During this time, the shogun loses a little bit of power, which I think could be a podcast in itself. When you have the Mongol invasions or the failed Mongol
Yeah.
invasions, they actually failed because of weather and storms. Luckily,
Well, yeah. Well, that's the kamikaze, right?
yep, yep.
The big
Um,
tsunami, and that's how they get that divine wind.
Divine Wind, again coming up to World War II, right?
And yeah, that's why those suicide pilots are called out in World War II, the kamikaze.
Yeah, so it ultimately winds up happening here in about 1280s or something when you have the Mongols attack Japan. The shogun kind of loses a little bit of his power because he loses a lot of money and he can no longer really pay his samurai or this military of warriors around the country. So a lot of these samurai start attaching themselves very closely to local lords. And soon enough, you have samurai started fighting like almost one another in these civil wars
Oh,
because they start
they have the
fighting for these,
skill.
and these lords, right, are called daimyos, I think.
Yeah.
Samurai start fighting for these, feudal lords between one another, and this really kind of lasts from between 1467 to 1568. It's actually known as the Age of the Country at War, which sucks. It's like 100 years of war.
I'll just constant fighting. You see that a lot. You don't ever notice that, Pete? You see that a lot in like I guess ancient times, or if you want to call it, like older medieval Europe and stuff like that too. You have like the 100 Years' War, right, between France, which
Can you
lasted
imagine?
longer than that. But you have these wars, and they're not fighting like they're not like wars like we think of now,
Like
obviously. But they're just like
battles? No, it's just they're in a
yeah,
state of war.
but
Yeah.
they're in a constant state of war where they're constantly looking for chances to fight each other and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like they're fighting every single day for 100 years, but you're
Yeah.
just constantly at war. You have a whole generation brought up to just be like, well, yeah, we're at war with this clan, or if you're in Europe, we're at war with this country and stuff like that. It's just like a crazy concept to fully wrap your head around that. It's just like that's just what it is. Like it was just accepted for over 100 years. We're at war.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah.
ready for it. Dominated everything.
Imagine though, like your entire life, you're born into a time of war, and you basically go through your whole life at a time of war.
Preparing for war, being ready for war, training for war. Like
I
it's
can't
not
imagine.
going away.
I mean, I guess you could make the argument. I mean, no, well, we were born at a time of peace. 80s was peace. Well, unless you count Cold
Well,
War, but it's not
Cold
really
War
war.
and stuff like that. Well, you can always argue, I guess, with all the wars that America gets involved in. Like, and there's always something, right? We average
Yeah.
a major war every 20 years, probably even more than that now. But it's different too because we're not fighting in it. You might know someone who is, but you're not. The country's not suffering, not like dealing with the ramifications of it either.
Yeah.
All the time, directly.
In late 1500s, you have these two daimyos that get into this huge fight, and Hideyoshi in 1588 kind of takes power. And this is where he also kind of elevates the samurai because he orders a sword hunt where he commands all peasants to surrender their swords and other decrees, kind of very strict barriers, right, between social classes. Because Hideyoshi himself had risen from a common foot soldier to the ruler of the country through different civil war, and he did not really intend for others to follow that. So a peasant or a merchant could no longer wear an armor of a samurai. Only specific samurai that were under his control, because Hideyoshi eventually becomes a shogun, could have weapons and could be the official warriors of Japan. And it kind of stays like that. Really, Japan closes the door until Matthew Perry comes about, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yes, yes.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about samurai, and then we'll get into obviously Matthew Perry and guns and the end
How
of
things
samurai.
change, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so I guess like we talked about a little bit about what they basically did. So we said they were employed by those feudal lords. Not every samurai had a daimyo, right? There was a few that didn't, and those were known as ronins. So if you didn't have one, I'm sure you've seen movies and stuff like that called those things. But they were known for their martial
Ronin
arts
or 47
skills.
Ronins or something.
Yeah, the Last Ronin. Well, that's the Last Samurai too with Tom Cruise. Which when you think samurai, you think of Tom Cruise. But okay. Also, when you think of fighter pilots, I guess you think of Tom Cruise, right? And bartenders and everything else.
And jumping on couches.
Super spies. Yeah, there you go. But they were basically to hold their lord's territory against rivals, right? They had to fight the enemies, that anyone that was identified by the government. They would fight against hostile tribes, bandits like the Mongols, obviously, and they lived in barracks actually. And then later on, they actually lived in castles. They had a private home built into castles. That's where they had, and there actually were female well, no, there wasn't. There wasn't female samurais, but there were female warriors in pre-modern Japan, the Onamusha, and they fought in battle alongside samurai men, and they were members of that warrior class, the Bushi, the warrior class. They were there, and they were trained in the use of weapons to protect their household and family, and honor of all times in war. So they were always prepared, but there were no female samurais. They were just female warriors, if that makes sense. So something
the one thing I read about women too, it was very common. Samurai, as you kind of mentioned, eventually they get such a status, especially when the rest of the country is disarmed, that when you're a samurai warrior, you're not just like this gun for hire. Like you really have a status. You're educated. You become like a leader, really, in a community, and you have that money and all that stuff. But what was really interesting is that if you disgraced yourself in battle, you were encouraged to basically commit suicide. Talking about women, if you were married, if the samurai chose to kill himself because he disgraced his leader or he did not win a battle, it was expected of the wife to also kill herself by this ritual suicide along with her husband. So it's almost like if your husband failed at his and we'll get into Bushido code of honor, then you should kill yourself as well. And women had an option, though, because the men were supposed to
cut their stomachs out, more or less, yeah.
The women had an option of cutting their stomach or their neck, and they were also allowed to tie their legs together before they committed suicide so they could be found in a more dignified pose.
Okay, then. Yeah.
Right. And then a Ronin, you mentioned Ronin. Ronin, for me, when I started doing this research, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. You're like a Jedi Knight, you know what I mean? Just kind of walking around, you have your sword. Quite. But not quite. Actually, if you were like a worthless person without a master. If you were a samurai whose master died or whose leader died, or you basically
kicked out.
You were disgraced and kicked out. People were like, you were ridiculed. They're like, go away. They were kind of equivalent to homeless people.
Well, I think the Ronin kind of gets popularized in Western culture because it's kind of he's the outlaw, right? He's the loner type of thing.
Yeah,
and that's very
the Western
that's very
thing,
Western. Yeah, it's very Western. It's very Western culture. The individualism. They can do anything. Yeah, that's one Ronin against everybody, right? So they that kind of gravitated, from that era. I would think when it became very popular in the West is what I mean.
And at the same time, when you're looking at these samurai warriors, almost all samurai could read and write, especially
which is a big deal.
Big deal. Yeah. Literacy levels in Europe were non-existent, and these guys were reading and writing, and also big into art and painting and
art. Yeah, teachers. A lot of them during times of peace became teachers and stuff like that.
Yep.
So maybe they would have become podcasters if they had it back then. Who knows?
The Samurai Podcast.
The Samurai Podcast. Samurai. I bet you there's got to be one out there somewhere called that.
There's got to be out there. Yeah.
If not, let's copyright it right now. LLC.
That's right. We're gonna start another one. Samurai Podcast.
Just because it sounds cool.
Indeed. Let's get into a little bit of what it meant to be a samurai. And I think samurai, when you think of samurai, obviously you think of the swords, and you also think
katana,
of the elaborate dress that they had, because it wasn't just swords. It was also what they wore, the costume itself. The armor consisted of leather shin guards, billowing pantaloons, kimono, broad thigh guards tied over the pantaloons, right? Then you had metal case shoulder guards that were huge, this big chest protector, an iron collar, a cotton skull cap, Then there was an iron face mask that covered most, if not half, of their face,
And these are
roughly.
like works. These are like works of art too. When you saw
Yes.
them,
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
like,
Absolutely.
as were the
Um,
swords.
and as well, the swords they believed were like part of them, right? That's what I got out
Yeah,
of
it's
it.
like very spiritual. Yeah. Well, the last one those swords took a year to make. Like those actual katana, like blades, like the true blades and stuff like that were made during that time. They took a long amount of time to make. There was a craftsman who would make them. They would put their own marks on them, and yeah, it was a status symbol. It was a family symbol that would be passed down. Those katanas, those samurai swords, which most of them right now are actually in the United States, like authentic samurai swords. Most are in the United States. They were taken as spoils of war during the Second World War
That's
by
crazy,
Allied
isn't it?
soldiers. So yeah, there's more in the United States than are in Japan.
I always thought of Indiana Jones and like the last one, not the last one, but the last one in the '80s, The Last Crusade, where at the beginning, the young Indiana Jones is like, "This belongs in a museum." And now that like we're historians, we're older. I think of like it probably doesn't belong in a museum, like because Indiana Jones always thought like in an American museum, but most of the stuff we have in American museums are actually is
Yeah, it was like
stolen.
taken from somewhere else. Yeah,
Yeah, it's messed up. So it's like it belongs in a museum, and then like you look back and you're like, I mean, like I guess that was meant to be pure, but it probably belongs inside that country and that
yeah,
museum for
and we see
right.
them there. Yeah, absolutely.
Not necessarily where we're going with it. Yeah, no, there was this idea that samurai was one with his sword. This sword was almost like part of one's
Which
code and culture.
yeah, that makes sense because that's your main weapon. Like that's what you're using to fight off, kill your enemy, defend yourself. So the idea is you have to be good with it. Make it one, like one in the same with yourself because it has to be a part of you if you're going to like defend yourself with it all the time. And it's a status symbol too. Only samurais were allowed to walk around with swords, I believe, right? So
And it was
just
two. Yep.
one you would traditionally known as like as a katana, and then a smaller one, right?
King
Yeah,
Wakizashi, that's what it was.
not two like Leonardo carried.
No, 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 not identical. So
Yeah,
the entire samurai culture was grounded in this concept of Bushido, and we alluded to this a few times. Basically, what that meant is, as you mentioned, the way of the warrior. And the central tenets of this Bushido code were honor and freedom from fear of death. So ultimately, because you mentioned before, also like when this was brought back in World War II, like honor and freedom from fear of death. Like you're not supposed to be afraid of dying.
no, that
Um,
dying is an honor if you're dying for your leader.
Yeah. A samurai was legally entitled to cut down any commoner who failed to honor him or his
Yeah,
property.
and that's it. And that's the thing too. Like I was reading, like are the samurais good or bad? And they're like, they're not really either. They're following like their rules, their code, but the code isn't as chivalrous or as honorable as like a lot of the films and books portray them to be. Like yeah, like you said, they would just kill if they thought their honor was being tarnished in some way, they would kill that person. They were brave and skilled warriors, but they definitely burned down villages. A lot of them collected the heads of the people that they killed. Like
Yeah,
that
did you
was
see
just
that?
that was very common. Like the trophy, like you collect their heads, and that's not something that you really like they talk about because again, it doesn't fit with this narrative. But it wasn't just like, oh no, I will not harm innocent women and children. That was not that was
No, they
not
they cut women and
that
children, beheaded them as
that
well. Yep.
if that was the enemy, you got to get rid of them. That's just what you do.
I was very surprised when I started reading about the whole beheading things. Like they would carry a bag with heads, and that was also a piece of evidence that if like your leader, right, sends you out, you always brought the head to prove that you did what you were supposed to do. But even for their own death, because death was such a common occurrence, they actually would prepare. One thing the samurai would did is they burned these incense things in their helmets. So their helmets always had a certain smell to them that in case their head was cut off, it didn't smell so bad as it was collected and brought over to be presented to somebody.
Well, they're
It's like,
being considerate of the head collector people, I guess. That's why it's nice. The thing about that, you like it's so if you're fighting a battle, like oh my head can very easily get chopped off. So let me just like make sure it smells
talking about
good.
sharp swords. Did you see this one? So they said that they were some of the sharpest swords in the world to
Ever,
this
yeah.
day, really. To test their swords, there's different methods. One common way was to make 16 specific cuts through a dead body that they would hang from a tree. And another test was to test your sword on a convicted criminal. So it's like once your sword was finally forged for you, they would literally like kill somebody, hang them up, bad person presumably, and see if it could cut the body in specific ways, or they would just find some convicted criminal and try to get them as well. Oftentimes, they would actually kill random people that were like on the street. Like if you didn't look at them the right way, if you didn't respect them. Variety of weapons though. I mean, it wasn't just the swords,
No, it
right?
wasn't a sword. They used spears. They used gunpowder. They're not using like Gatling guns. That kind of what spells the end of them, like the repeating rifles. Not really using rifles, but I guess almost like musket types, right? They use
Yep.
those weapons.
Also bows. Bows are pretty big for them.
Bows and arrows. Yeah, that was their big. Yeah,
Yep.
that's a big like distance weapon, projectile. It's definitely bows and arrows.
And actually, guns. The guns were initially introduced to Japan from Europe in about 1543. Samurai were the only ones allowed to own guns until the middle of 19th century, so until 1850s. Samurai only walk around with swords is so wrong. Like, no, they legit
Yeah, they had those
had
flintlock
guns.
rifles. It was like the flintlock. Yeah. Well, I
Um,
think another thing that was interesting. Did you see? I saw this name pop up a few times, and he was considered like the most famous samurai of them all, Miyamoto, and he's basically known as he's the most famous samurai of them all, the most skilled swordsman, the best horseman, all those things. And he's basically reached like mythic status in Japan. Like his name is like what we would give to like Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan. Like he's like the golden standard of the samurai in Japan. Like the things that he did, like again, a lot of it. Remember we did talk about like Davy Crockett? Like he was like, he could ride lightning bolts, so he did all those stuff. Well,
yeah.
that's kind of like what Miyamoto was like in Japan. Like this guy just like he sliced his sword and just swung it through the air, and the force of his slice destroyed the enemy, like stuff like that. But he's like a legend. He's probably the most famous of all the samurai. But it was a lot of even some foreigners did become samurais. I'm sure you
Well,
saw
I
that.
saw that too, right? Yeah. Only
There's
four
a few.
European men that were recorded.
Yeah.
There was some. There was a Dutch dude. There was an English sailor, French Navy officer.
Others might have fought with the samurai, but only a shogun could grant samurai status. So it's almost like knighting someone again in Europe. I know we keep on making that comparison, but it's a very fair comparison.
Well, and then there's, which is something we talked about, maybe making a podcast one of these days as well. That was Yasuke, who arrived in Japan in
Yes.
1579. Based on what I read, he arrived with a priest, Italian priest, and he came through India. But the reason why Yasuke is kind of known is the sheer fact that Yasuke was black. And he is commonly known to historians as the Black Samurai. We really don't know if he was a slave or if he wasn't a slave. That has not been established. We do know that he is first kind of comes out in the capital city of Kyoto, and then he crosses paths with his feudal lord, and the feudal lord kind of assigns him to one of his samurai, and it kind of leads to this training. What really kind of separated from everybody else is the fact that he was over 6 feet tall,
which was
and it's huge,
huge, especially in that time.
Yeah, those standards. And they said that he had the strength of 10 men. Like, it's almost like, why is there not a movie about this?
Well, they said Chadwick Boseman was actually connected to a movie. Yeah, but he unfortunately passed away. And there was a animated series that was released, and it tells the story of it. But it's kind of like sensationalized as like magic and robots and stuff like that in it too. But they did have it. I'm sure they'd make some sort of movies and stuff like that at some point.
I think what eventually happens to him, he is ambushed somewhere, and because he doesn't want to surrender, he does perform the seppuku, which is cutting off his intestines.
They think, but it's not
again.
Much
we
known.
think, they think,
They're not sure. I saw a lot of things with the samurai fighting ninja. They actually did fight each other.
Really?
That's something that did happen. There were several times. The samurais usually always won. Obviously, ninjas were more like guerrilla tactics, stealth, quickness. Samurais were more out in the open. But during the War of Tensho Aga in 1581, the ninja clans got pretty much almost wiped out by the samurais. All right, they were the forces of Odai Nobunagana. Right, and this is the same guy that that the Black Samurai fought for, believe it or not. And then the ninja were defeated, almost wiped out. But that's kind of, they said this is almost when some of that legends of the ninja really started to get carried on, because the samurai were impressed by their fighting skills, by their tactics.
When I was younger, I was always like obsessed with ninjas. Well, remember that movie American Ninja?
Yeah, he's always have to Americanize everything, which is fine, which is cool.
No, but do you remember American Ninja with Michael Dudikoff?
I remember it somewhat.
It's good.
They made a couple of them. I know they made a couple.
There was like 4 of them, I think.
Yeah, but we're from the 80s, so our exposure to ninjas was like Ninja Turtles.
I was going to say there's not a lot of movies about samurai, but one of the most famous movies is The Seven Samurai. I'm considered one of the greatest movies of all time.
You have The Last Samurai, I remember, with Tom Cruise.
Yeah, but that one doesn't count.
That's what I was. I mean, it was an interesting story, but it's not really historically accurate. Let's just say.
Yeah.
And Tom Cruise was actually not the last samurai. The last samurai, or the last person who is considered the last samurai, is a man by the name of Sago Takamori. And he actually lived from 1829 to 1877. When he died, he's usually remembered as being the last samurai, the last person who followed Bushido, followed that code. But he was the last one. the samurais were pretty much stripped by their power by 1877. And he
Yeah.
so kind of followed. He was just kind of like looked on, I guess, as like the last person of that age, more or less.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into the end of the samurai. But anyway, the movie is obviously Akira Kurosawa's movie that I mentioned before, Seven Samurai. Came out in 1954. I remember watching it in college, and I remember it being long. I'm pretty sure it was like almost 4 hours long. That movie. That was an intense movie. I sat through. I had to watch it in class, and I was like, "Wow, this is a long movie."
That's because
Um,
the professor just didn't want to teach those days.
now we know. So anyway, things start to really change. Meiji Restoration. Essentially, what ends up happening is mid 19th century. You have the stability of the shogun inside Japan kind of starts to waver a little bit, and you have the big thing is the incursion of Western powers into Japan,
Yeah,
especially the 1853 Commodore Matthew C. Perry and the U.S. Navy that like sails in to Japan.
basically
And
forced them. Be like, yeah,
100%. But also, I mean, it forced them to sign a commercial treaty with the United States. It's like, look, you like all our guns? We have all these guns and we have this gunpowder and all this stuff, and we could basically kill you all. So, like, you're going to sign this commercial treaty. And prior to this point, Japan was very much closed off to Europe and to the
yeah,
world.
just a few ports, right? A few port
Yeah.
trading posts, and again, most of the stuff really wasn't trade. They kind of just it was just the war. The different clans kind of just went at each other with that. Like it wasn't really major things. They're like, we don't want anything from the West. And they're like, we're doing good. But then Perry comes in again. They've got cannons and guns. The samurai at this point just have swords.
Yeah, there was this controversial decision to open the country to Western commerce and investment, specifically because there is a lot of peasant unrest and famine and poverty. And there was a huge resistance to the shogun because the shogun doesn't want to open it up. But there's such a resistance to the shogun among conservative forces in Japan, but also many samurai by this time, who, because as you mentioned before, the samurai now have their own like castles. They have certain status. They have a high status, and they're also seeing that the country's not doing well. So they begin calling for the restoration of power of the emperor. And what essentially happens is you have these two powerful clans, right? The Choshu and the Satsuma. They combine their efforts with a lot of samurais, and they topple the last Takagawa shogun and announce this imperial restoration. And that's in like early 1868. And basically, feudalism is officially abolished by 1871. Within 5 years, so by
Yeah,
mid 1870s, wearing of sword is officially forbidden to anyone except members of the National Armed Forces. So
yeah.
all samurai stipends were converted into government bonds. All samurai, like if you were an older samurai, you were given a certain status if you wanted to stay within the official military. As far as a samurai being in charge of a region or protecting a specific lord,
That's done. Yeah,
gone.
that's done.
Yeah, it's gone.
And there was in 1877 there was a samurai rebellion that was quickly crushed, and that's really what that movie The Last Samurai talks about. So
Yep.
they were trying to like keep that way of life from being abolished. Like you said, Pete, they couldn't carry their swords around, which also means they couldn't execute commoners who paid them disrespect. They couldn't do that anymore either. So the samurai,
Yep.
what do you mean we can't just kill someone who disrespects us anymore? So they kind of lose that power. A lot of the samurai, a lot of the younger ones become exchange students. I read, right, because they were like they could read, they were well educated, so they did that. They started to open up their own schools. A lot of them, they became writers, reporters. They set up companies, and there's government service. So the samurai class itself, because they had that education, they become prominent people in like the government, in just industry, everything that's going on in Japan. That's what they become part of.
New Japan, right? So this is a
New
restoration
Japan,
of the
they
emperor.
kind of
Yep.
get assimilated, but because they were always at higher class and they had that higher education, they're able to modernize pretty easily on a whole.
And it's kind of sad though. You're like Japan opens to the Western world.
And they
All of
just
a
done. Yeah,
sudden,
25
it is
years
just done.
later.
Done,
It's like
literally, right?
not even recognizable anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, feudalism's gone. The emperor's brought back into power. The emperor's like, no more shoguns, no more samurai. We're gonna have a military. We're gonna have guns. We're gonna have an army and an
They're
army
going to be like
structure.
Europe, right? Don't they
Lit-
hire Britain to help them build a navy and train their naval
Literally,
officers? They get they buy American books and American weapons. They get the Prussians and stuff like that to train their armies. Like they know what they're doing.
yeah, literally. By 1912, Japan successful military strength signed alliance with Britain. 1902, and then you have the Russia-Japanese War, right? I mean, they defeat the Russians in Manchuria, which is huge. Like all of a sudden, it's like, wait, what? You were just a bunch of samurai like 50 years ago. Not even. Like, what is happening here? And by the end of World War One, so we're talking like 1919. Japan is already recognized one of the big five powers alongside Britain, U.S., France, and Italy. And that the speed with which Japan opened up You know what I mean? Like ended feudalism, ended this, shogun and samurai rule. It was just quick, to say the least. The 1920s, like kind of is a revival of Japan's military tradition. Really,
Just
in
the
1930s.
idea of it, yeah.
Yep, like imperial aggression, Japan's entrance into World War II goes back to those traditions of Bushido principles, banzai attacks, death before dishonor or defeat. There was this strong sense of honor and discipline and devotion to the common cause. All of that really stems from early samurai and their code of Bushido.
Yeah, they're doing it again to get the people. It's something that everyone knows. It's something that's legendary status. So if they say now anyone all you have to do is follow this Bushido code. Remember, 100 years prior, if you did something like that, you'd be killed if you weren't part of that class, right? Yep. Now they're saying, no, now you're a part of it. You're a part of it now. The emperor says you're part of it. All you have to do is join the army, join the military. So people are going to gravitate to that. It's patriotism. It's an extreme form of it, but that's basically what it is too, right?
Yep. Like looking back, nostalgia is huge, right? And in this case, you study the history of the samurai, and you realize that like only they could carry weapons, only they had any status. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're told like you could be just like them. And it's like, oh, all right. Yeah, I learned about this in school.
Yeah, it's just like you, Pete, when you got your Indiana Jones hat and little whip and stuff like that, right? Started digging in the backyard.
I did get Indiana Jones hat. You laugh, but I do have one. I don't know where it is, but I do have one. I don't have a whip though.
I saw one. I saw the whips for the new movie. I saw them at Target, so.
You could buy whip like toys.
Yeah, I don't know what it does. It's not. It doesn't. I just saw it real fast, but I'm sure it's not like a real whip, but probably does something. I'm sure my kids will want it. So
see, why can't they make like samurai cool? No, but make samurai cool and have like samurai stuff. Ninjas for some reason always got more play, especially in the 80s than samurai.
Well, because it was an easier Halloween costume.
Easier Halloween costume.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny, but true. Anyway, I mean, I think that pretty much covers samurai, right? I mean, do you have anything else? I mean, I feel like we did so many fun facts.
I think we did a lot of information. We don't want to overwhelm people, but obviously we missed a lot. People are gonna be, oh, you missed it. Of course, this is just a brief overview of some samurai, their traditions a little bit, give a little bit of information on it.
Yeah, I'd say that pretty much covers it. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in once more. We do appreciate it. If you need to find us, you can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. You could also check out the Evergreen website. We're on there as well. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And please feel free to email us with any questions or suggestions. We appreciate those. And we'll see you guys next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.